Okay, today's discussion will be on the hormonal, ovarian, and uterine changes during the menstrual cycle. In this discussion, because you are going to write the full answer question or essay type of question in your university examination, and how you are going to be prepared. So we move on. So here is the same thing I have split up. I have split up here. Describe the hormonal, ovarian, and uterine changes during menstrual cycle. What I am doing here, I have split into three components: 1, 2, and 3. 1 is a hormonal changes. And again, when I come to the hormonal changes, I will talk the hypothalamus, pituitary, ovary. In the hypothalamus, you have two hormones, GnRH, kisspeptin. In the pituitary, you have LH and FSH and surge, especially the LH surge. In the ovary, you have estrogen, progesterone, and inhibin. This is hormonal changes. Then ovarian changes. The ovaries, they divide, or in the ovaries, the changes happening, formation of the Graafian follicle, that is from the primordial follicle, that is a follicular phase, and rupture of the follicle, that is ovulation, and then formation of a corpus luteum and its activity. Follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase. These are the ovarian changes. And the uterine changes include three components: the bleeding phase or the menstrual phase, followed by a proliferation of the endometrium and the blood vessels. And after the ovulation, it is the glands which are getting secreted, and decidua formation, or the endometrium is prepared for the arrival of the blastocyst. That is the secretory phase. So that means there are three phases there: menstrual phase, proliferative phase, and secretory phase. Suppose if you try to answer this question, I will just write all these things in one. Though for time's sake, I have just split in. I have just make hormonal changes, ovarian changes, and uterine changes 1 to 3, 1 to 3, 1 to 3. So that makes some of you make you to sail through. Then I move on. I made this graph. This is a little putting all things together in one graph. Here in the bottom, I have the days of the menstrual cycle, 1 to 28 day, presuming that the menstrual cycle is of a 28-day duration. The cycle duration is 28 days. And now the one I have made here, the uterine changes, that is uterus. This is a menstrual phase, that is from 1 to 5 days. Then from the menstrual phase, it goes to a proliferatory phase. This proliferatory phase comes from the 5th day to up to 14th day, or at around 14th day. That is a proliferatory phase. Then comes the ovulation. This is the 14th day. Let us consider 14th day ovulation. And ovulation, then comes the secretory phase. Mind you, here I want to impress upon you that the ovulation is dependent upon this process. That means the life of the corpus luteum. So that means this part of the ovulation is fixed. So that means from the day the Graafian follicle ruptures and releases ova till the end of that corpus luteum, this is fixed, 14 day. This is 14 day, or whatever. So now, because this is, that means this is 14 day. So that is why the ovulation for all practical purposes is calculated from backwards. That is from the last day of the menstrual cycle. That is, suppose the first day of the menstrual cycle is the onset of bleeding. So from there you count back 14 days. That is the day of ovulation. Say for example, if it is the cycle duration of 35 days, if that is the case, you deduct from the 35 day minus 14. That means 21 day would be the day of ovulation. The 14 day is fixed. This is fixed. This can be variable. This especially proliferatory phase is variable. Okay. Having said that, because that is necessary when you are trying to calculate the safe period or trying to find out the day of ovulation just by the menstrual cycle. These are the uterine changes. 3 I have made here. You can draw this diagram and make yourself comfortable. Then comes the ovarian changes. The ovarian changes, I have one follicular phase and luteal phase. The follicular phase is the Graafian follicle. The formation of the Graafian follicle, its selection, its dominance, and its maturation. So that is the follicular phase. So then when it comes to the point of ovulation, that ruptures and releases the ova, then forms the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum, it is formed and it functions, and subsequently if there are no gonadotropins or there are no pregnancy related hormones coming, that is what is called a human chorionic gonadotropin. If it is not coming, so it degenerates. So I say it again, in the ovary there will be the follicles, they proliferate, they recruit new follicles because there will be number of primordial follicles which are ready to be recruited. They will recruit some 4 or 10 primordial follicles, and one of them will be selected, and this selected things becomes a dominant because the granulosa cells in these things start multiplying and multiplying, and they will try to attract more and more FSH, because this follicular phase is dependent upon the FSH. So now the events that become a dominant, this cell grows on and on, it becomes very big, and then from there it becomes about 15 to 20 millimeters, 20 millimeters, and this 15 to 20 millimeters contains a ova, and then it ruptures. That is the ovulation. Then after rupturing, the corpus luteum is formed. It functions, it secretes the hormone, primarily progesterone. Also it secretes estrogen and inhibin. And I have written the hormone secreted at this space. And then subsequently, if there are no inputs, if there are no LH coming, it degenerates and that disintegrates. That is the ovarian. Now coming back with the hormonal changes. Hormonal changes, I mentioned the hypothalamus. I mentioned that three endocrine glands participate in the hormonal changes. One of the endocrine gland is hypothalamus, then anterior pituitary, and the ovary. So what happens in the hypothalamus? So there will be GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is released. And now this GnRH is not released continuously. So this is coming in pulses. These are pulses. These pulses of the duration of 90 to 120 minutes. So that means, so there will be a pulses of 90 to 120 minutes in a day. You will get, if it is taking 2 hours, there may be 12 such pulses coming up, such things coming up here, and they will be there spaced rather very regularly. Then as the late phase, because if I were to tell the follicular phase is can be considered into two components: the early phase and the pre-ovulatory phase. Especially this is a pre-ovulatory phase. And in this pre-ovulatory phase, the pulses of the GnRH are very high. That means a very high frequency. The frequency is increasing. So that means they are happening at 50 to 60, one in 50 to 60 minutes. So that means they are fast. So then when it reaches the rhythm, so there will be a large amount of GnRH activity, and this GnRH triggers the release of another hormone, LH, and that LH surge is coming up. Then after that it slows, it becomes a little irregular, and it slows, and it finds the rhythm at the end. At this point of time, there is no GnRH stimuli, or GnRH is there, but depending upon the inhibin or the preparedness of the anterior pituitary, so this is happening. Now, in the anterior pituitary, what I have done two hormones here. Practically, these two hormones regulate or regulated by one by the hypothalamus, two by the ovarian hormones. So I have not mentioned about how the ovarian hormones influence here. I have not shown here, but anyway, so what happens, how the GnRH is going to stimulate? GnRH, because of its activity, that means it has another hormone I mentioned, kisspeptin, increases the secretion of FSH in the beginning stage. FSH increases, and the increase in FSH makes this proliferation of the endometrium, and then at some stage this becomes decreased because of the negative feedback mechanism. And this negative feedback, but only one of the Graafian follicle starts manufacturing or maturing, and this Graafian follicle only secreting a large quantity of estrogen, and now at this point somewhere here it becomes a positive feedback. So that means the negative feedback now changes into a positive feedback, and suddenly you have this positive feedback is brought about by this GnRH pulses, and the LH is secreted in high quantities. Suddenly there will be a sudden surge of LH activity, and the FSH activity. This is FSH activity, and then it declines. You can just see that the FSH is decreasing there, LH is decreasing, and almost LH and FSH have come to the basal level. So this is what happens in case of anterior pituitary. And in the ovary, what is happening? In the initial phase, as there will be an increase in estrogen levels. As this is a proliferative phase, the estrogen level is increasing. So it goes on. And this is increased estrogen level goes on with the maturity of the Graafian follicle. So initial stage, some amount of this thing is coming from the granular cells. In the later stage, this is one Graafian follicle is contributing to the estrogenic activity. Now, when it becomes ovulation, you can just see that progesterone is practically at the basal level and estrogen is high. So now, as the progesterone is coming up, the estrogen is also decreasing. Now, corpus luteum produces more progesterone. You have the progesteronic peak somewhere around 20 or 21st day. Now, if you are looking back, so this is again another peak of the estrogen is coming, and I expect all of you try to write these diagrams, and if you can write this diagram, that would answer the entire question of the uterine, ovarian, and hormonal changes happening in the menstrual cycle. Okay, so now having said that, I want to go little more detailed manner. Here in this graph I had shown you. Maybe you may want to practice, or you may want to practice the figures I have given it from Guyton or Genong. You can take that. Let us examine here what is happening. The hormones, I have just put the hormones in one place here. They are one place. So these two are, this is FSH and this is LH. FSH and LH, you can just see that peaking somewhere around 14th day. Okay, so now this is a red one is estrogen. You can have two peaks here. You just see that two peaks, and the blue one is a progesterone. These are the changes happening. So you can just see that this is a follicular phase. So now in the follicular phase, what is happening to these hormones, you can very well see. So now what is happening in the early follicular phase, there is not much change in the LH, but in the late or a pre-ovulatory follicular phase, this will increase. Okay, so now if you are looking at the FSH, so initially this was a little high, it was a little high, and this comes back, and again it regains. That becomes here, it becomes a positive feedback. Then after that, again it goes into a negative feedback. So this is a FSH. So already a progesterone, estrogen is increasing and reaches peak, and again a second peak arrives here along with the progesterone peak. Progesterone is having only one peak in the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. So there are menstrual cycles which are called anovulatory menstrual cycles. In that case, you don't have this progesterone peak because there is no ovulation. If there is no ovulation, there is no corpus luteum. If there is no corpus luteum, the progesterone is primarily coming from the corpus luteum. So that means you don't, if you investigate in these individuals, they do not have the progesterone. So if they do not have the progesterone, and all those effects associated with the progesterone are absent in these individuals. Now, that's coming back. This is the hormonal change. You just try to look into this, try to practice that. Then ovarian changes. Ovarian changes, I mentioned the recruitment, dominance, maturation. Recruitment means there will be a recruitment of the primordial follicles, and these primordial follicles, they increase in size, they become antral follicles. Antral means the antrum formation takes place, and the one which is having the antral follicle that gets dominated, that is singled out, and others will die. So this singled out will mature as a matured Graafian follicle. And this matured Graafian follicle, you have these antral space. This antral space is filled with the fluid, and this fluid is a secretion coming from the granulosa cells, and that will have the proteolytic enzymes and prostaglandins and other substances. So that would increase the permeability here, and that would push because of the greater secretion, that is push the ovum to the side. This is stigma formation. And once it reaches a particular critical level of the increase in size and the permeability, so that ruptures. This rupturing releases the ovum. Ovum comes along with the corona radiata, or the group of cells surrounding the ovum. These are granulosa cells, and then this is getting converted into, this forms the corpus luteum, and this becomes a matured corpus luteum here, and that is how it is happening. And if there is no gonadotropin or LH coming from the pituitary, or human chorionic gonadotropin not coming from the fertilized egg, that is a blastocyst or the chorioblast. So at that stage, the corpus luteum dies and it regresses, and that is the ovarian cycle. So that means recruitment, dominance, maturation of the follicle, rupture of the follicle, formation of the corpus luteum, maturation of the corpus luteum, and death of the corpus luteum. These are the cyclical changes happening in the ovary. Now coming back with the uterine changes, mostly the uterine changes we see in the endometrium. Yes, certainly there are changes in the myometrium also. So even there are changes in the cervix, there are changes in the vagina. So we are not, because the question asked is about the uterine changes, and the uterine changes we look into the endometrium, and I briefly mentioned about the myometrium now. So what is happening to the endometrium? In the menstrual phase, the endometrial phase sheds off. That means a part of the endometrium is it goes into necrosis, and it is removed. So that means a necrosis and removed because of the spasm of the capillaries. If you are studying if you are looking at the arterial supply of the endometrium, it has two type of arteries. One, it has a basal artery, the straight basal arteries. These are permanent, and then there are these capillaries are spiraled up. These are functional capillaries. So that means you have a structured arteries here. The complex is stunts there. Over these stunts or the small sharp shoots, there will be a growth of the capillaries. So they will be removed off. They're only the short stunt of these arteries they remain. So this is what happens at the end of the menstruation. The endometrium is just thinner. It is less. So then, as the proliferative comes, because what is happening, the estrogen is increasing, and these cells, the endometrial glands, along with the capillaries, the endometrial capillaries, the arterioles, they start growing because there is angiogenesis. They coiled up, and you can see that they are increasing in size. This is known as a proliferative phase. That means there is a proliferation of the endometrial glands and the capillaries. So they become, so now it becomes thick in the mid of these things. It becomes thicker. So now this is happening because of the estrogenic effect. Now what happened here in the ovulation, because there is a change in the hormonal profile, the progesterone is coming. Now this progesterone adds a secretion to these glands, and because of the secretion, they become coiled up and they will become edematous. So a lot of secretion is there, and you can just see that these secretions are getting accumulated here. You just see the secretions. They will be, and now these arterial supply, they are coiled up. They will coiled up, and they will be this thing. So if you take the cross section of the endometrium, you will see the glands as a corkscrew shaped endometrial glands, and even if you are taking the looking at the arteries, they are very coiled arteries. So you can just see that. And at the end, again, because of the absence of progesterone, because what is happening, the progesterone is reached peak here, and because of the absence of progesterone, this would not stand the vasospasm take place. Now let me tell about other properties of the myometrium. Myometrium is the muscle layer of the uterus. So during the estrogen increases the contractility of the myometrium. It increases the contractility of the myometrial cells. And as it peaks here, the contractility is greater. And this contractility of the myometrium may be required because of the what we can say during the movement of the spermatozoa. So you can just see that the sperm is deposited, and then sperm has to enter the cervix into the uterine cavity, then enter into the ostium of the fallopian tubes. Then it has to end up, the fertilization takes place in the isthmic part or of the fallopian tube. So that means the moment there would be contractility. These contractions, they suck the spermatozoa or semen into the cavity, uterine cavity. Now here, if this contractility increases here, and at this point the contractility, because of the progesterone decreases the contractility of the myometrium. So that they become silent, ready to receive the blastocyst, because the blastocyst cannot be implanted if it is the motile, if the myometrium is active. So that means it should be quiet, and a lot of secretions, a lot of nutrients. So that means it is preparing the arrival of the blastocyst. Now what has happened, suddenly this progesterone dropped down, and because of the dropping down of the progesterone, and the relatively the estrogen still remains little higher, so the proportion between them becomes less. So now the contractility takes place. This would produce the spasm, or the capillaries. Capillaries are passing through the myometrium, and this contraction of the myometrium uh, really block the arterioles, especially those functional capillaries or functional arterioles. They will be blocked. There will be a sort of ischemia, necrosis, and shedding of the endometrium, because that part of the endometrium is shed off or removed or necrosed. So that means this is because of the because of the progesterone drop. The second, the sensitivity of the capillaries to the spasmogens. Because once the tissue damage takes place, this tissue damage initiate other a mild degree of inflammatory reaction, and this inflammatory reaction again keeps on adding. So this is what the menstruation. Okay, so now I have mentioned about these three components. Here in the bottom, we have the basal body temperature recorded. You can just see after ovulation, the body temperature increases. Okay, so that means there is an increase in the body temperature in the luteal phase or after ovulation. That is an indicator of the ovulation. Then we move on, because I have explained all those things. Yes, please. Any questions? Okay, I have explained all those things in the. Please unmute or mute your microphones, because I am getting the disturbance here. So I have explained these changes. Whatever I am trying to explain in the coming things. So all the events are described in reference to the uterine changes, the menstrual phase, the proliferative phase, and secretory phase. Now, I just read out for you. I have about 16 events. Maybe that would be helpful to you. One, the corpus luteum dies, because I start with the bleeding, the onset of bleeding. Corpus luteum dies. So because of the corpus luteum, the progesterone level decreases, then estrogen level decreases, and that produces the spasm, and the bleeding begins. The endometrium sets, the bleeding start. This is the onset of the menstrual phase. So that is day 1 to day 5. Then during this time, hypothalamic GnRH activity, and because GnRH activity is having a rhythm of pulsatile, it is about 90 to 120 minutes, so one pulse is coming. Then there is a negative feedback effect that is producing the decreased FSH and LH secretion. That means, so that because of the negative effect, there will be a withdrawal of the negative feedback, and that increases the FSH secretion. May not be that much as, not as much of LH. Now this FSH, because I'm taking only FSH, that recruits new set of follicles, the antral follicles, so that begins the proliferation. That means you are getting the follicular phase here. These follicles secrete low amounts of estrogen, and also they secrete inhibin B isomer. So now this estrogen stimulates the endometrial glands and the capillary growth, the functionalist layer of the capillaries to grow. So this is the proliferative phase. This is days 5 to 14 in terms of the endometrium. Now, so this is again I have taken here. I am continuing the proliferative phase in terms. So the number 5 is same. This is the beginning of the proliferative phase. That is, means estrogen stimulates the endometrial glands and capillaries to proliferate. That is a functionalist layer. Now estrogen and inhibin suppress the, because of the increased estrogen and inhibin, which is coming here, it suppresses the FSH secretion. and because of the negative feedback. And this decrease in FSH progressively cause the atresia of all the, because there will be 4 to 10 enteral follicles which are recruited, and the all of the excepting one, all of them will be dying, or they will go, or they will be atretic, or they will be dead. So that means only one follicle remains, and it is a dominant follicle. So number of theories coming up with a dominant follicle. One, because a follicle which is growing, or which becomes bigger, and it will have more granular cells, more FSH receptors, and it will sponge all the FSH coming from the pituitary, and that is the others will not get, the other follicles do not get enough FSH. That's one. The second, it has the androgen synthesis or aromatase enzyme. These granular cells have aromatase enzyme, and that would secrete the androgen, and this androgen kills the surrounding follicle. So that means it grows alone. Third thing is, granular cells secrete another hormone known as a anti-Mullerian hormone. This anti-Mullerian hormone, so that would kill the other follicles which are trying to grow, and only this becomes a dominant. So these three events may make it a dominant follicle, and that keeps on producing. Now this dominant follicle, this becomes quite large and secretes a large amount of estrogen. And now this estrogen will have a positive feedback. It stimulates the growth of the follicle, and that would stimulate the more and more FSH is coming up, and more estrogen is produced. It becomes a large follicle. Large follicle may be 15 to 40 millimeter size. Now, high estrogen exerts a positive feedback on gonadotropes in the pituitary, and that will produce the LH FSH surge. And now at this point of the LH FSH surge, there is what is called a GnRH pulse frequency also increases. The GnRH pulse frequency increases, and this GnRH pulse frequency is triggered by another hormone from the hypothalamus, that is kisspeptin. So that increases that. So all these things together, there will be a LH and FSH surge. LH surge, what happens? The enteral secretion increases. The increased enteral secretion, that would produce some biophysical and chemical changes, and that would make the Graafian follicle to rupture. So now this rupturing releases the ovum. That means ovum is released, and this ovum again, after releasing the ovum, the remaining part becomes the Graafian follicle without ovum, without rupture. It all collages, and that will collapse, and that forms the new cells. The luteum or the corpus luteum is formed. So that is a number 11. Now coming back with the number 11, this is same as that, formation of the corpus luteum. Then corpus luteum, it produces the progesterone and estrogen and inhibin A. The A component. In the beginning part, it is B. The progesterone increases the secretion of the endometrial glands. Now these endometrial glands are filled with the secretion and a nourishment, or a new nourishing fluid necessary to nourish the blastocyst in the initial stage and ready for implantation. So these glands appear like a corkscrew appearance in histology, and the capillaries are highly coiled. So this is secretory phase. So now on 14th is high levels of progesterone and inhibin exert negative feedback on LH and FSH. So now the negative feedback begins there. So they will decrease the LH secretion or FSH secretion from the pituitary. So now as they decrease the secretion, so okay, one point. Or if there is no pregnancy, so that means I'm talking about a pregnancy, LH-like activity. LH-like activity means human chorionic gonadotropin. If it is not coming, the corpus luteum dies. So now when corpus luteum dies somewhere around 25th or 26th day of the menstruation. So that means within 2 to 3 days after the death of the corpus luteum, so the endometrium goes into a spasm, or endometrial myometrium have a spasm. So that means you have the premenstrual syndrome. Premenstrual syndrome is an indicator of the increased estrogenic activity because of the sudden loss of the progesteronic activity. So that means the endometrial shedding take place, and that will because of the decreasing. One important thing, the endometrial shedding do not take place. All the entire endometrium does not is removed or debrided in one day, or shedded in one day. So it takes 5 days to remove. That means it some part here, some part there, and it goes on slowly, and then the entire endometrium is replaced by 5 days. So that means the entire bleeding by the menstrual is about 25 to 50 milliliters in the entire cycle. So that is the amount of blood lost. Okay, now this is all the events happening during. I have included everything there in these 16 events. You can just go through it clearly. I will share the video with you. Now, for a little greater, those persons who are trying to know more, because what I have missed in the previous graphs, I have not included the inhibin B. This is inhibin B, and I have not included inhibin A. So now those who want to do it more, or they want to score a little more marks, you also add inhibin A, inhibin B there. This is how the inhibin B is happening. There is an increase in the beginning, and then a peaking and come back. The inhibin A is increasing in the second phase. So that means it is coming from, this is coming from the granulosa cells, this is coming from the corpus luteal cells. Now I have added a kisspeptin here. It is a hormone secreted from the hypothalamus. You can just see the increase, and this increase is associated with the increased GnRH pulses. So this is one I have already explained in my earlier lecture, but those who are interested, so these are the hormonal changes separately I have shown. The hormonal changes, LH, FSH, I added kisspeptin here, then here estrogen, progesterone, I have the inhibin B and inhibin A. Now come back here. So though I asked you to draw this diagram, try to practice this diagram. So this is the primordial follicle there, and this primordial follicle, this is the ovarian changes we are trying to talk about. So that means this is a pre-enteral follicle. That means there is no enteral formation. This is antrum. So there is no enteral formation. So that means the secretion starts building up, and these secretions are like lakes are coming here and here, and they coalesce and they become a very large lake. So that means when they become a large lake, they will push the ovum on one side, that eccentric placement. To start with, you have the ovum here in the center. Slowly, because of the antrum, it is pushed to the side, and when the antrum becomes large, it will push to eccentrically on one side. So now this becomes what happens when it is eccentrically placed. There would be a pressure from the enteral fluid, and this contains prostaglandins. It contains the proteolytic enzymes. These proteolytic enzymes, they digest the membrane here, and it increases the permeability because of the prostaglandins, and the permeability increases the movement of fluid here. That increases further. Biophysically, the pressure or the fluid level increases within this closed chamber. So that means it is pushed and it comes here, and it will have this part will have some, what I can say, the blood supply to this part becomes less, and that is called a stigma formation. So once the stigma formation takes place, that would, because of the proteolytic enzyme and the greater pressure, that ruptures, that releases the ovum along with the corona radiata, and it contains a number of prostaglandins, kinins, and other tissue products, and the ovum is released into the abdominal cavity and then enters back outside peritoneum and enters back into the fimbria of the fallopian tube. They will contract because they have kinins there. They take up the ovum. That is one part. So then this becomes a corpus luteum, corpus luteum, and this becomes dead. That is called a albicans, corpus albicans. So this is the story of the story in the ovary, and here I am trying to show you there are a number of follicles, and they are recruited. There will be 4 to 10, and one of them would become dominant, and it grows on, and others will die. So that is what recruitment, selection, and dominance. And in the dominance, there is a rupture. That is the ovulation. Now, this is another thing which I have taken it from Genong. I want you to practice this diagram. This is the endometrial changes. The endometrial changes, because you have this almost it is the removed the entire this thing. This becomes thin, and slowly the endometrial glands increase, and they reach up to the point. They become thick, and they are filled with secretion, and again they start. So this is the menstruation. One point I want to say, from here to here is fixed. That is why whenever we are calculating ovulation, we count it from backwards. Okay, so this is the follicle, how it is happening. Please practice this diagram. This diagram is about the ovulatory changes, the endometrial changes, the follicular phases. Only the hormones are not there. You practice. Now here I have mentioned about ovulation. Ovulation, LH produces the progesterone, and this progesterone also, and also the secretion comes. The secretion have a proteolytic enzyme, which I have mentioned, weaken the wall of the Graafian follicle, and produces stigmata and degenerates and produces stigmata, and then hyperemia and prostaglandins. As such, there is a hyperemia. Prostaglandins further increase the permeability. The fluid moves into the cavity, into this antrum, and that further swells of the Graafian follicle, and that pushes the ovum eccentrically further, and then the enteral pressure and that rupture. That is ovulation. Then after that, corpus luteum formation. Okay, so now that is about the first question.